Hi to everyone in the frontotemporal dementia support group and anyone watching the video. I'm Jo Bailey and I'm making this video today from my home. It is a lovely hot 30-degree day here in sunny Queensland, and this room does not have air conditioning. So I have the ceiling fan on and I have my window open just behind the computer over there. So there may be a little bit of background noise. I also have my cat sitting on the desk here. So hopefully not too many distractions. Today is a pretty important conversation. I want to ask you a question. As caregivers of various sorts, are we making ourselves sick? Now, the work of today's presentation is based on the book and the different speeches given by Dr. Gabor Mate. He spent his career as a family physician and medical coordinator of a Vancouver hospital, a palliative care hospital. His work can be found everywhere, but especially so in a book that I'm recommending to you right now called When the Body Says No. And one of his most profound statements, who gets sick and who doesn't is not accidental. Now that's quite a brazen comment to make. However, with my own career as a clinical psychologist and having spent many years working in hospitals and with many physically and emotionally unwell people, I came to realize how much Dr. Gabor's statement rings true. And I want to share a few things with you today that may seem surprising, confronting. You may not even believe them to be true, but I urge you to push through any resistance as I speak and just hear me out. We tend to think of diseases like rheumatoid arthritis, asthma, Crohn's disease, cancer, IBS, diabetes, diabetes 1, pretty much any chronic or autoimmune condition as a disease that just strikes a person, some kind of genetic vulnerability or some kind of lifestyle factor like diet or smoking, etc. But what we have found is that these diseases are not random. They're not unexplainable. They are very clear diseases that have matching personality traits, behavioral patterns that suggest the largest majority of these illnesses were created by the individual themselves. Now, it's very important here that I clarify something. This is not the same as fault. We're not blaming anyone. No one intentionally or even knowingly cause themselves to become unwell, to acquire a chronic or debilitating illness. So it's not their fault. Let's get that word out of the equation from the very beginning. But it is the patterns and the behaviours that they engage in that cause the problem or create the illness. Now, there is one group of people that are highly prone to getting these illnesses and diseases, and there is also very good reason for it, which is what I'm going to discuss later. But the one group of people who engage in almost all of these pathologies or pathological, potentially deadly patterns of behaviour that lead to pervasive disease and illness are, you guessed it, right? Yeah, it's the caregivers. And there are lots of studies on this, so you won't have to look very hard to find evidence base for what I'm saying today. The association between caregiving and chronic illness is undeniable. In this study that I'm putting on the screen now, we learned almost 82% of caregivers of people with dementia had at least one chronic illness. Almost 61% had two chronic illnesses, and the link to chronic illness was actually stronger for younger caregivers than it was for older caregivers. Now, one possible reason for this is that younger adults probably have other life roles other than caregiving that get compromised or left behind when they become a caregiver. They might be parents, they may be working. So firstly, it's no accident that caregivers are overrepresented in the morbidity statistics. You know, I was a caregiver for my own mum who had dementia, frontotemporal dementia, for years. I was also working at the time. In fact, I was working multiple jobs. I was studying and I was a single mum myself. And yes, it took its toll on my health. And the demands of my life But also the patterns that I created for myself contributed to this. Now, I didn't do this on purpose. I did it because that was what I had to do. But it certainly contributed to my unwellness. Now, I thought caring for my mother who raised me and loved me was the right thing to do, the only thing to do. I thought I had to be responsible for everything. I thought caregiving was a noble job, a necessary job, a priority in my life, often to the detriment on many other very important factors. And I thought I should do it without complaining, although I sometimes did. But I thought I had to see my caregiving role to the very end, otherwise I was a failure, a bad daughter. But at the same time, caregiving was essentially making me sick. I was the primary caregiver for my own children, so I had a sole identity as a carer for many years, decades even. Well, those thoughts are self-destructive. They are the ingredients for burnout, for fatigue, for stress, but also for chronic illness and autoimmune disease. They are the recipe of illness. We cannot separate the mind from the body. They're intricately linked. Thoughts like I had will impact the body without exception. But the medical field often tries to separate these things. For instance, if you go to your doctor with your rheumatoid arthritis or your chronic fatigue, did they ever stop? Did your doctor ever stop and ask you about your childhood? The environmental stresses in your life, did they ask about your relationships? Probably not. They are more likely just to diagnose your condition based on the physical symptoms you present and hand you a prescription. And often with these kinds of conditions, the prescriptions are going to be immune suppressants, because when you're under constant chronic stress, your immune system starts to malfunction. Your medicine then just simply further suppresses your immune system. You may be given a cortisol steroid, some kind of steroid, but they don't talk about the life factors, the underlying cause of the condition. See, most people in this example, this sort of situation, are being treated for symptoms, not cause. And unfortunately, often the treatment creates more symptoms, which keeps you in this cycle of never getting better or potentially getting worse. So the first critical error our health system tends to make is separating the mind from the body, and we get nowhere. We create a perpetuating cycle of unwellness, and we wonder why chronic health conditions and problems continue to increase. Well, at least in Western cultures, we tend to do this. There is a cultural element to this, but I'm speaking here of Western modalities of healthcare. And the other critical error we make is we try to separate the individual from their environment. And this is an impossible assumption. You can't do it. For example, it's been shown that children whose parents are stressed are much more likely to develop asthma. Now, why is that? Even in polluted areas, it's the kids of stressed parents who will still have more asthma symptoms. Why? Many doctors just can't explain that. And how can parental stress cause their children to be more inclined to get asthma? Well, let's unpack that a little bit more. Those who have asthma will know that the primary symptom of asthma is breathlessness or chest tightness. You feel it here and you go to the doctor and you prescribe medication. Now, if you get medication, it's probably going to be one of two types. The first is Ventolin, and Ventolin is a bronchial dilator. Its job is to open up the airways so that you can breathe better. It's a synthetic copy of adrenaline. The other inhaler that you're probably going to get is a steroid to suppress inflammation and swelling. Also, so you can breathe better. It unblocks the airway. It's a synthetic copy of cortisol. Now, what is adrenaline and cortisol? They are both stress hormones, both of them. We're essentially giving asthmatics more of their own stress chemicals to treat their chronic condition. Their own stress response mechanism has been depleted. It's been exhausted. So we have to give them more stress hormones to help them breathe. Strong emotions and stress are triggers for asthma, and those symptoms of breathlessness and chest tightness are very similar to symptoms of anxiety. There is a known and a strong link between asthma, anxiety, and depression, and similarly, anxiety and depression may be associated with poor asthma control. Very circular, isn't it? And similarly, if you have rheumatoid arthritis or lupus, doctors are probably going to prescribe you cortisol. And Dr. Gabor, in his book and in his YouTube videos, he asks the question, if we are giving people stress hormones to treat their conditions, shouldn't we be asking, is there a connection between stress and their disease? It's just fundamental logic. And it's a simple and it's an obvious and it's a fair question, right? But Western medicine just treats in isolation. It removes the body from the mind and the individual from their environment, and it just treats the symptoms. And when we treat the symptoms, we get side effects and then medicine to treat the side effects. And we wonder why we are chronically unwell. The children of stressed parents are going to be stressed. The parents' stress programs the physiology of the child because you can't separate the child from their environment. And when you are stressed, the stress isn't just in your head, it's through your entire body. When there is stress in a home, it just isn't with one person. It's through the entire system. Our immune systems are not isolated from our physiological, our social, and our emotional relationships, and we shouldn't be treating it as such. Now, Dr. Gabor, he talks about how this all works in the context of a disease that he has personal interest in, a rare condition called amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, otherwise known as ALS. Now, I find that interesting in my work with FTD because there is increasing recognition of a clinical overlap between FTD, frontotemporal dementia, and ALS. And recent advances in our understanding of the neuropathological and the biochemical and genetic basis of these conditions provides evidence for a common underlying pathogenesis. So basically what I'm saying here is that FTD and ALS is part of a clinicopathologic spectrum of disease, that they share a clinical pathology. Both FTD and ALS have a terrible prognosis, and we really don't understand either of these too well. Sorry, I'm just watching my cat just walk across the screen. We don't understand either of these diseases too well. Sometimes, yes, you go to sleep there. Good idea. Sometimes some patients get a catastrophic diagnosis of both FTD and ALS together, and sadly those patients don't survive very long at all. Maybe they'd be lucky if they live a year or more. Now, there is some emerging research with patients of these conditions that we now call the TDP-43 proteinopathies that I find very interesting, very curious, something quite profound even to me, that shows some unconscious patterns in these patients with ALS and FTD. And even with diseases like dementia, stress has found to play a role, and it is very apparent in the evidence base that stress negatively affects the immune system, and the immune system is known to play an important role in the development of dementia also. That same key cortisol hormone that's released when you're under stress has been linked to problems with memory, and stress is also closely linked to conditions such as depression and anxiety, which have also been suggested as factors that could increase the risk of dementia. Now, are you following me? I hope I'm not losing you, but this is very circular, and all these things are intricately connected. The role of stress is undeniable. Now, There is no one to blame here. I'm not attributing fault to anybody, and people repeat patterns unintentionally to their own detriment, but often outside their level of awareness. So we're not blaming people for their diseases or diagnoses, not at all. And I'm also not saying the only thing here that's responsible is stress, but we do have a very clear and we have a very dominant thread here. And if we're going to find treatments and explanations for these diseases, we need to ask the hard questions. And there are undeniable patterns that we see in people who get sick with chronic illness. Undeniable. So what are these patterns that translate into chronic illness here in both patients and caregivers that become overwhelmed, stressed, or sick? Well, a few patterns appear to be emerging quite clearly here, and I could digress very easily, and I'm going to try not to, but I could talk about attachment and authenticity. I could talk about childhood trauma and adverse health outcomes, or I could talk about the heart, gut, and brain connection, but I'm going to let you look into those things yourself, or maybe I will do another video on those, as it is truly fascinating work that's emerging there. But for now, I just want to focus on one simple thing. If you don't know how to say no to things, then your body will say it for you. And this ties in with the book that I mentioned at the beginning of this talk, Dr. Gabor Mate's book. And if you haven't read it, then I do recommend it, or at least have a look at Dr. Gabor's work on the net. When we deny or suppress our own needs, our body starts suppressing a lot of things too, including our immune system, because all these things are connected, and suppression of one system results in suppression of another, and ongoing suppression of these systems will result in pervasive sickness and chronic disease, and stress is the thread that binds all of this together. And caregivers are great at this, aren't they? Suppressing their own needs, their own feelings, whilst under immense stress, but always trying to be nice, always trying to take care of others throughout, but ignoring their own needs at the same time. Remember, when a stressed kid gets asthma, we suppress their immune system more. A stressed caregiver gets sick, we treat the symptom. We continue to overlook the mind and the body connection, and we continue to separate the individual from their environment. And we continue to get sick. Caring for others and being kind is great. It's part of our shared humanity, but you must be able to ask for help when you need it, and you must take time for yourself. You must break these patterns and beliefs that keep you from being well yourself. If your thoughts are stressed, your body is stressed, and over prolonged periods of time, you will get sick. If you have a chronic illness of some sort or an autoimmune condition where pharmacological treatments are being prescribed, it's likely they're just suppressing your healing system even more. Now, this doesn't mean stop anything that your doctor has prescribed or recommended for you. Please don't do that. But it's a reminder to connect the dots. It's to remember that the symptoms that you're experiencing are an expression of the problem underneath. That nothing in your body is happening in isolation or by accident. That one part affects the other. That the beliefs driving your patterns, your maladaptive patterns, may need adjusting. That the body is a communicator, a messenger that can't be ignored. Healing comes in various forms, but it starts with a realization that a lot of these conditions emerge from the same story, a story that's making us sick. Stress is not just what happens to us, it's how we process it. When there is no release, no reprieve from that stress, our systems become overwhelmed and strained. We suppress our feelings and our responses to such a point that we manifest our own disease and unwellness. This is not your fault, but it is making you sick. In my private consultations, I walk you through your own healing and I help you take control of the impact of the traumas in your life, your stress, through various evidence-based techniques and strategies that are natural but work on all these systems in an interrelated and holistic way. Just like dis-ease, disease in one part will impact all the parts, so too healing of one part can impact other parts. But it must be holistic and it must recognize the root cause of all illness, which can be reversed and healed with things like sound, with light, with movement, and with a new story and a new belief system. Or you can do your own research and learn how we're able to transform, to recover, to buffer ourselves, or even heal from all sorts of enduring stress, disease, and unwellness. We don't have to be making ourselves sick, and it is okay to say no, because if you don't, your body will say it for you. That's all for now. Hope you enjoyed this conversation. I will be back again soon to talk about something else. Until then, take care of yourselves and each other and have a very happy and peace-filled day. Bye for now.